Now here's a short little game that I think just about every DOS gamer has played. Dangerous Dave was originally created by John Romero in 1988 as an example of what could be done with a particular add-on he wrote for the AppleSoft BASIC programming language used on Apple II computers. Now, think about that for a second. One of the guys responsible for Doom, the game I reviewed last week, made this game as an example of what could be done with something else he made. If that wasn't proof of where this guy's future was headed, I don't know what was. In any case, a couple years later, a DOS port was released, and that's the game you're seeing on screen right now, and that's the game we're going to take a look at the game stats for. As stated, Dangerous Dave was developed by John Romero, and the DOS version was released by Softdisk Publishing in 1990 to help promote a new bi-monthly gaming disc they were pushing under their New Gamer's Edge brand. Interesting piece of trivia, that same disc also had a game on it called Catacomb, developed by John Carmack, another of the trio that eventually left Softdisk to form id Software. Dangerous Dave is a one-player platformer game featuring multiple 320x200 graphics modes, including CGA 4-color, EGA 16-color, and VGA 256 color modes. The last of which is generally the mode you want to play in, though curiously, all three modes look very different from each other. As for the sound effects, you're stuck with the PC speaker, but as for the release date, the game's always been freeware, though sadly the only version I can find available on John Romero's website is the Apple II version, which is interesting in its own right, but if you want the DOS version, I'm going to go ahead and recommend the usual place, the RGB Classic Games website at www.classicdosgames.com. Now the story to this game is incredibly basic. An evil bully by the name of Clyde has stolen all of Dave's high jumping trophies and has hidden them in a deserted pirate hideout for reasons unknown. You gotta break in, dodge all the traps, get all your trophies back, and escape to safety. Seems simple enough, right? Well, some of the levels have some very tricky parts, and since this game is incredibly basic, instead of describing the power-ups and such, since there kinda really aren't any, I'm just gonna talk about each of the levels instead. As you already saw, the first three levels are incredibly simple, but here in the fourth level, that purple thing is going to be the bane of your existence, and you're probably going to lose a lot of lives trying to figure out how to safely get by it. Just sit and watch it for a little, and the pattern should become obvious, though there's actually two different firing patterns it may take, so learn how to deal with both of them. As for the first three levels, level 1, just get the treasure and leave. Level 2, same thing, just don't go jumping for those impossible to reach treasures. And in level 3, you're introduced to the gun and the jetpack. Learn to use that gun to the best of your ability, and also, once you get the jetpack, don't go all the way to the right of the level, otherwise you'll be rewarded with a 50-point gem and a fiery death. Now, level 5 is the first level with an open ceiling, and in this game, that means warp zones. And yeah, John Romero was indeed a Super Mario Bros. Fan. For any gamer active in the late 80s, it was kinda hard not to be. Basically, get above the ceiling, walk off the edge of the level, and you'll be in a super secret level filled with treasure. Interestingly enough though, these secret levels are actually extensions of the other levels that you normally can't reach, but in the old Apple II version of the game, you would reach these secret areas from the levels they were a part of without actually going through a warp zone. Once you clear the secret area, you go back to the level you came from. Level 5 isn't anything too hard, just feel free to abuse your jetpack at the end because you don't really need it to clear the level, just to get a few extra pieces of treasure. Level 6 is my personal favorite because it's more about skillful timing and less about luck when it comes to dealing with the obstacles and enemies. There is one particular crown near the other side of the level you might be tempted to go for, but don't. The precision necessary to get it without touching the instant death vines requires pixel-perfect movement. Though this brings up an interesting aspect of the way hit detection works in this game. You only need to be pixel-perfect in the directions you're moving in. Once you get that trophy down there, you're probably going to be thinking of going back the way you came, but that's actually really dangerous. Just line yourself up fairly well with that opening in the middle, fly straight up with the jetpack, and you should be fine, because you're not moving left or right, and thus not triggering a collision with the vines at the sides. Level 7 takes a lot of practice. The first key you press should not be the right arrow key, otherwise you'll probably lose a life really quickly. Instead, fall straight down, carefully grab the gun, and time your jumps and shots at the enemies so that you're falling from a jump when you shoot your gun. Later in the level, the enemies will really cause you a hassle, especially the last one, but by that time you should also have the jetpack, and it's much safer to just fly over that last enemy rather than attempt to kill it. Also, be very wary of the purple girders that are missing a pixel, because you'll fall right through them. Levels 8 through 10 all have warp zones you can visit, though the warp zone for level 10 is extremely difficult, so I only recommend visiting it just for the challenge. Besides, if you hit all the warp zones, you're going to have the maximum score possible by the time you get anywhere near the end of the game. The level 8 warp zone can be a little tricky, but if you're having trouble making the really narrow jumps in it, just try approaching them while holding the jump button down for rapid jumping. That way if you miss, you should be able to land on the lowest platforms around you to make another attempt. Level 8 itself has a hole in the fire you need to fall through to reach the second half, and while in the second half, use your jetpack to fly straight through the deadly vines without giving them a chance to hurt you, and then approach each new screen from as high as you can to avoid being insta-killed by a lucky shot from an enemy. Level 9 is one great big tease. Many of the treasures cannot be safely attained, many of the floors are false and you'll fall through them, and if you attempt to go for the gun hidden beyond the rightmost wall, you'll actually get physically stuck and will have to restart the entire game. Bear that in mind. The warp zone for level 9 is short and sweet though, so shouldn't cause you any troubles. Level 10 is the last level, and it is massive, as is the warp zone connected to it. There's just lots of traps and lots of things to watch out for. You're going to need to do a little memorization if you're going to survive, and there's very little I can say that's going to help you. Just persevere until you reach the end and get yourself a congratulations screen. Now, I know this game was only intended to be a demo really, and that this port was rushed as John Romero only had about a month to make it work, but there are a couple shortcomings which kind of bother me, mostly the score counter. See, the score counter is only 5 digits long, but you'll max it out long before you reach the end of the game if you know where all the secret stuff is. Not to mention, once you pass the quintuple 9 mark, your score will no longer make it into the high score table properly. Well, okay, it makes it in properly, just any new scores made afterwards that are less than quintuple 9 will be ordered higher in the table for some mysterious reason. The other thing that bothers me is that if you want to play with a joystick or gamepad, because you have to worry about both a gun and a jetpack, you jump by pressing up on your joystick. Now, that kind of control scheme works perfectly fine on a keyboard, but using up to jump on joysticks and gamepads never really works well with platformers for a reason that's kind of difficult to explain. Thankfully though, with DOSBox's keymapper, you can get around considerations like that and make yourself a proper jump button. I find it curious though that the CGA and EGA display modes look so radically different from the VGA mode. I mean here, let me show you an example of gameplay from the CGA mode. Yeah, it's nothing too out of the ordinary, but you may have noticed the gems you can collect are smaller for some reason. Well, now let's take a look at the EGA mode. Well, firstly, Dave's skin color has gone from typical to magenta to cyan, and secondly, the vines are green now instead of purple, and the third level is colored almost completely differently. So yeah, that's Dangerous Dave, a very simple Mario-inspired platformer that you can easily beat in under half an hour once you're good at it. But it is still very fun to load up every now and then. Actually, when I started looking up information on this game, I learned that one of the secret areas that you could get to in the original Apple II version was in level 6, but when you beat this game it says there's only 4 warp zones in levels 5, 8, 9, and 10. Now, the way you would get to this original secret room would be to skip getting the trophy in level 6, then jetpack straight through the door in the ceiling and walk all the way to the right past the typical level boundary. And that still works in this version of the game, but what if we go through that door and touch the left edge to trigger a warp zone? John, I know it's a little late, but if you happen to be watching this, I have a bug to report. Not really much else to say though. The game runs in DOSBox almost flawlessly, just set the cycles to auto or max, use the graphics scalers to make the many perfect edges and gradient shadings look nice and smooth, and if you insist on playing with the joystick or gamepad, make sure you turn off timed intervals, otherwise moving to the right may not work properly. And that's all there is for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 26, where I'm going to be covering a fairly normal game. Yeah, that's the only hint you're going to get. And if it isn't enough, then you're going to either facepalm or head desk yourself when you find out what game it is. Though if it is enough of a hint, make sure you send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and tune in next Saturday to see just what game I'm talking about.